Visit www.flaskup.com for all your Mr. Pandaria raiding guide needs. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this Mr. Pandaria raiding guide. And in this video we're going to be taking a look at the 10-man normal mode version of Jin'Rokh the Breaker in the Throne of Thunder raid. Now in order to complete this fight we use 2 tanks, 3 healers and 5 DPS. However, if you are unable to make the DPS requirements for this fight as they are relatively high, you can always consider dropping 1 healer and putting in another DPS. The damage isn't that overly out-healable, I guess the way of putting it is. This encounter is relatively simple, however there is quite a bit of room for disaster really. And the main aspects of the fight are based around the boss's conductive puddles and your healers and your damage dealers gaining a buff. We'll talk about that later on in the video. Now the boss's first main ability that you need to be aware of is called Static Burst. And this is an area of effect ability and it will hit everybody that is in the raid, causing them to take between 95,000 and 105,000 nature damage. Now this debuff will also apply 10 stacks of Static Wound to the current tank. Now the current tank will then take nature damage based on how many stacks of the debuff they have when they receive a melee attack from the boss. And Static Wound will inflict 26,000 nature damage per stack when the boss does strike them. Now a third of this damage will also be inflicted to other players, so you don't really want to be getting your stacks too high on the tanks, and as you can see it is going to be a little bit of a healer intensive fight. Now something else that you might have already noticed on the video that's in the background is little orbs that are slowly moving their way to players. Now this will be cast throughout the fight and it will be cast roughly every 20 seconds, and this ability is called Focused Lightning. And this will create an orb of lightning which fixates on a random raid member and it will begin to move towards them. So it's, if you think back to Will of the Emperor heroic mode, it's a bit like the Titan Sparks on there for those of you that have obviously done that fight. Now this orb cannot be slowed, rooted or attacked, and it will deal damage every half a second to anyone that is standing within 5 yards of it. If the orb hits a player, which will obviously happen eventually because they are too fast, they will catch you in the end, it will explode and deal a relatively high amount of nature damage to anyone that's standing within 8 yards of the point of explosion, or detonation you could say. Now the player that the orb has fixated on is going to take this detonation damage. Now it isn't overly high, but it is quite a bit of a nuke, so your healers do obviously need to be prepared for healing spiky damage throughout the whole fight. Now when the orb has exploded, it will leave behind what's called a lightning fissure, and if you can see on the screen, there's these little kind of blue smoke clouds, I guess they look like, with a blue circle on the floor. Those are your lightning fissures, and these will deal 75,000 nature damage to anyone that is standing within 3 yards of them, and the lightning fissures will be there for the remainder of the fight. Now if a lightning fissure gets hit by one of the balls of lightning, the focus lightning, then it will cast an ability called Implosion, and this will go off and inflict 350,000 nature damage to everyone in the raid, and it will also leave a debuff on them, and this debuff will then cause them to take 10% additional damage for Implosion if it happens to go off again. And this is also a stacking debuff, so you don't want this to go off at all throughout the fight really, and if it does go off and then goes off again, you're going to be taking 10% extra damage the second time round, so around 385,000 nature damage. It's all going to start adding up. Now throughout the fight the boss will cast an ability called Thundering Throw 4 times, and around the outside of the room, which you probably can't see too well on the video, are 4 Mogu statues, and this is where the boss will throw the tank, or his current tank, at one of these statues, and the tank will fly gracefully through the air and then eventually hit the Mogu statue, which will cause him to take a high amount of physical damage, and then he will land on the floor in front of the statue. Now when he lands, you don't want people standing at the point of landing, because he will stun them for, I think it is 6 seconds, and he will also inflict a small amount of damage to them. Now when a tank has been thrown at one of these statues, it will also call an ability called Conductive Water to appear on the ground near the statue, and as you can see on the screen, this water will fill up about a quarter of the room that you're standing in. Now, this is where your DPS and healers get to have a fun time, because if you stand in this water, you will be granted a buff called Fluidity, and this will increase the damage dealt by players as well as also increasing the healing that they receive. However, it will also increase the amount of nature damage that players take by 80%, so you do need to be aware of that at all times. Now, other abilities are also very harmful to this conductive water, because if, for example, someone has focused lightning on them and blows it up within the water, the damage that was meant to be in an 8-yard radius will spread throughout all of the conductive water, and everyone will also take 80% increased nature damage from that. So it's going to deal a lot of raid-wide damage, so you don't want to be blowing these up in the water. You want to put them at the very outer edge of the room, out the way, where no one can run another lightning over them, or no one can stand on them, or anything along those lines. And now the final ability that the boss has goes by the name of Lightning Storm, and this is another AoE ability that he will cast roughly every 90 seconds. Now, when this is being cast, the conductive water will become electrified waters, meaning that you can no longer gain the fluidity buff from it. Now, Lightning Storm is a channel spell, but it can't be interrupted, and it will last 15 seconds, and every person that is in the raid will take roughly 55,000 nature damage every second while it is active. So that's 15 seconds of 55,000 nature damage every second. Now, additionally, what you need to do is make sure that you have timers for this, like using Deadly Boss mods or Bigwigs or anything along those lines, because you want to be out of the water as soon as this ability is cast. Yes, it's all about maximizing your damage and whatnot on the boss, but if you get hit by this electrified waters, you're going to be gaining no buffs, you're going to still be taking 80% increased nature damage, and then you're going to be taking the 55,000 nature damage anyway, which will be increased. So you do need to be aware of that. When the Lightning Storm was cast, we all stacked up in the middle of the room on top of the boss, as it was easiest for AoE healing. So that's going to do it for this World of Warcraft raiding guide for Jin'Rokh the Breaker. He is a relatively simple boss, to be fair. You do get 4 of those conductive waters puddles, as I've mentioned, but on our fight we only got 3 because our DPS are really good. Nightwing Smash, slight guild reference there for anyone that does actually watch this guide. So yeah, the fight does vary based on how much DPS your raid can output. So as always, thank you for watching, and if you're interested in future Mr. Pandaria raiding guides, please do feel free to subscribe to the channel or check out www.flaskup.com.